So been MP for 12 years now.
Mm.
And in terms of your Christian faith, what difference does being a Christian make to you in your life, in your job, and all that you do?
Well, being a Christian for me is the essence of what my life is all about. And first and foremost, my life is about serving Christ. In fact, the best piece of advice I had when I became an MP was from a Christian when he said, play to an audience of one. And if during my day in Parliament I can get to the end of the day and I feel that I can stand before the Lord and that I've done my best for him in the issues I've engaged with and the time that I've spent, then that really is the most important thing for me. So I haven't been shy about telling people in Parliament that I'm a Christian, and in fact I think it's a wonderful thing that I'm not the only one. There are many other Christian MPs. We pray together, we study the Bible together, we have a Tuesday morning Bible study together, and it's accepted, I think, more than you might first imagine, that there are MPs who are Christians, because in a sense, everyone who comes to Parliament comes to want to make a difference, and we have our different perspectives in life as to why and how we want to make a difference. But being a Christian is one of those reasons. You having seen that the values and the principles of Christ make society work, and so you want to share those within your political perspective.
And it's brilliant to have a Christian influence in Parliament. There's so much going on.
Yes, it is.
To make a difference there.
It is, and I've been able to get involved in a number of issues. The pro-life work, and then making sure that we didn't extend Sunday trading, and then this issue of religious freedom over many years with others in a totally cross-party group. We have about 150 MPs who are in the all-party parliamentary group for freedom of religion or belief, and it's the biggest all-party group in Parliament now. So very exciting.
That's very encouraging. Yeah. So tell us about your role. You became Prime Minister Special Envoy December 2020. So how did that come about?
Yes.
And were you surprised to be asked to take that role on?
I was surprised and delighted when my name was put forward. The Prime Minister has appointed an envoy for freedom of religion or belief now for the last almost 3 years. And this came about because the Bishop of Truro conducted a review into Foreign Office work supporting persecuted Christians across the world. So how the UK government is supporting people who are persecuted for their faith. And one of the recommendations in the Bishop of Truro's review was that our country should have a special envoy to speak on behalf of the Prime Minister about persecution across the world and to connect with other governments, other countries, and to highlight where individuals are persecuted and where this situation should change. And so my role involves working with an alliance of about 36 other countries who have also committed to doing something about this tragic global phenomenon, and have representatives that I liaise with. So I work internationally, and I also work with organisations like Christian Solidarity Worldwide and Aid to the Church in Need and Open Doors.
And that sounds a huge task. So who gives you help in that, and who helps you in government?
Well, I have an office in the Foreign Office, and so I have a private secretary there who's very experienced in this area of work. And then I have a team in Parliament as well. And so I work there with an assistant, and there's a deputy special envoy, David Burrows. He was a former MP. And so we work together, spending many hours a week on this issue. And one of the things that we're doing, David and I are doing at the moment, is travelling around the country to talk to groups like this, to raise awareness within the UK churches of this phenomenon and how much we need to recognise it much more than we do within the churches in the UK. So we're travelling from I think I've been to Windsor, London. Last week I was in Chester. I'm here tonight, and then next week I'm in Scotland. So I think we're doing about 20 visits like this, and we hope to raise awareness of the issue.
It was very exciting when I looked at the list of events on the website here: London, Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow, and Tranmere. And I thought, we're there.
Yes, absolutely.
Tranmere's on the map.
Absolutely.
Which is great. So tell us a little bit about why freedom of religion or belief is so important, because, you know, we hear it as a title, but what makes it so important for everyone to be aware of?
Yeah, it is so important because it's such a massive issue. Across the world, 360 million Christians are persecuted for their faith. Highly persecuted. That's Open Doors figure, and it's a figure that's increasing. In the past year, Open Doors reckon that it's increased by 20 million. So people are being arrested, they're being imprisoned, people are losing the right to an education, they're unable to vote, they can't get a job. In countries, there are women who are being abducted and tragically raped, so-called forcibly married, but it really is rape. People are finding that their churches are being demolished, pastors are being imprisoned. At worst case scenario, people are being tortured or even killed. There is a Christian killed somewhere in the world every 2 hours simply because they believe in Jesus Christ. So it's a huge issue. Can
you say that statistic again, just for everyone to really grasp hold of how normative that is?
Yeah, every 2 hours a Christian is killed for their faith in the 21st century, and that's not something that we identify with, because you read about persecution in the Bible, say in the book of Acts, people being tortured, stoned, killed, the martyr Stephen killed, but what we don't realise is that this is happening today as we speak, and so it's how can we raise awareness and hopefully see change, see governments in particular change, because a lot of this is actually being perpetrated by governments on their own people. The worst case, in my view, certainly for most of the last few decades, has been North Korea. It is extremely dangerous to be a Christian in North Korea. If there is even a hint that you might be a Christian, then you will normally be put in prison, in a modern day concentration camp, for the rest of your life. And sometimes even also your family. So to own a Bible is extremely dangerous. Even to speak to relatives about your faith is very, very dangerous. In China now there is a resurgence of persecution against Christians over the last few years. There's been a law passed just a few years ago which bans 5 groups of people from being taken to church. One of those groups is children under 18. The government is now saying that it requires its consent, government consent, before any minister is appointed. So you wouldn't be able to be here without the government approving. I don't think you'd like that. There are quite often requirements that sermons are vetted by the government before they are read out.
Oh, they really like my sermons then.
Cameras in front of the pulpits to survey the people, so that if any of those 5 groups of people, and they include, for example, people working in the civil service or the military, they would be taken out. They're filmed. So much going on that we perhaps aren't aware of, and in large numbers across the world.
I mean, one of the scariest things about North Korea is if you're a Christian believer, you don't even want to tell your children you believe in Jesus because of the risk that the children can say something at school and all that follows from that.
Absolutely. I've heard a very touching story of, it's very difficult to escape from North Korea, and increasingly so, but I heard of one person who had managed to escape and came in contact with some Christians and was in a church and they were singing hymns, and she realised that her mother had been singing to her but only humming the tunes of some of those hymns. Isn't that interesting? So humming to her child the tunes that were Christian hymns. But yes, it's and it's very difficult if you don't think of the individual who's being persecuted to actually compute the numbers. So there's a young girl in Pakistan who I've been campaigning to try to help for now nearly 2 years, who I won't say her name, I'll just ask you to pray for her, this particular girl. She was abducted by a group of men because she was a Christian. She was taken and raped, so-called forcibly married. She managed to escape. But when she tried then through the courts to get some justice for her situation, the legal system didn't help her either. So we have to try and ask governments to do more to actually address this whole issue of persecution. Many governments around the world aren't doing enough. And so please pray for this young girl, because actually she's still in hiding. She's still fearful about these men coming after her again. So I'm still hoping we might be able to see her released. But of course there's another girl that many of you will be familiar, the name of Leah Sharibu. Leah Sharibu was one of 113 schoolgirls, Christian schoolgirls, who was taken by Boko Haram in Nigeria. In Nigeria, the Islamic extremists are attacking Christian communities, and they took these 113 schoolgirls. They have released them all except Leah, and she's not been released because she has refused to renounce her Christian faith. So we need to pray for Leah, pray for her mother Rebecca, terribly traumatic situation. But then you've also got a situation of lawyers being taken and imprisoned because they have defended people in court for their faith. There's a lawyer in Vietnam who's currently now imprisoned for 11 years, 1,000 kilometres away from his family, simply because he has stood up in court to try to defend people who've been accused. In other cases across the world, there are situations where, and in my role, whilst the persecuted Christians is huge, I also speak up for those who are not necessarily Christians, because it's really important that if we are claiming the right to share our own faith freely, we should also support others. And I have a little bit of good news. One person that I've been speaking out about and asking people to pray for is a lady called Valentina, and she's been imprisoned in Siberia. She was imprisoned for 2 years because she's a Jehovah's Witness. Jehovah's Witnesses are banned in Russia. They're considered an extremist organisation. They're pacifists. And I'm very pleased to say that just this week I've heard that she has been released following an appeal, released on parole. So, you know, prayer does work. Actually, I'm delighted to say, just in Chester last week when I was speaking about Valentina, I didn't know this. So, but there are, I'll tell you of another young girl. We have to pray for these young girls, who was a Yazidi girl, and in the Middle East conflict, particularly when Syria, things in Syria were very bad, she was taken again by Islamic extremists and taken because of her beliefs. And she asked them, "Are you going to murder me?" And they said, "Oh no, we're going to hurt you much more than that." And they took her as a sex slave. This is the kind of thing which is happening. People are being mistreated, some by their own governments and others by terrorist groups. But it's right across the world. You I know, have got some literature from Open Doors, and they list the top 50 countries where there is persecution. That's just the top 50. There are many more across the world. And of course now in Afghanistan, where the Taliban are, people are in fear of their lives, in fear of someone coming to the door at any moment, simply because of what they believe.
It is astonishing, isn't it? We can take our freedom for granted in this country.
Yes,
even
indeed.
Meeting here tonight.
Absolutely.
And yet around the world at this moment.
In country after country, yes.
So you speak up about Parliament, about these issues. I think even this week you're raising the case of Cardinal Zen in Hong Kong. Do you want to say a little bit about this current affair?
Yes. Hong Kong is the freedoms in Hong Kong over the last, particularly 4 or 5 years, have gradually been reduced by the Chinese government, and now freedom of religion or belief is clearly coming under pressure. And so this week, Cardinal Zen, a leading Catholic priest who's spoken up for human rights in Hong Kong, he's 90 years old, he was arrested by the Chinese authorities. And what was heartening was that the Speaker in the House of Commons granted an MP an urgent question this week in our Parliament, and so we were able to raise this issue, and the government minister there responded, Foreign Office Minister, and said how important it is that we speak out about this kind of thing, and that the international community challenges this kind of thing. And now, a few years ago, you probably wouldn't have had that to the same extent. What is happening here in the UK, we are showing some real global leadership in terms of highlighting this issue and the importance of it, which is why we are holding a conference this July on this subject.
The other thing I've heard you speak on Parliament recently is the Uyghurs in China and some of the surveillance that goes on. And we think of technology as being useful, which it is in many ways, but tell us something about how technology is being used in China to persecute them and other minorities.
Yes, the use of technology to persecute people is a really growing phenomenon. And so the Uyghurs are a group in China. You may have seen on the BBC some programs about them now being imprisoned in so-called re-education camps. But it's really an attempt to destroy the Uyghur communities. And so Uyghurs have a particular facial type, and what's happening in China now is that cameras are being used in the street to pick out these Uyghurs, and then there are points in the street where they will be stopped and can be detained, and listening devices are being used to also track them and to track their families and to listen for anything that they are saying which may demonstrate that they are not being loyal to the government. And these devices are very sophisticated now. They're even being planted in schools, even in nurseries, so that if the young children talk about issues, then the authorities will realise that this family is a Uyghur family, isn't being supportive of the government, and they will come and take them. So you're virtually being arrested, you're being surveyed and arrested by technology. And then, even if you are then arrested and you are questioned, there is the practice of the police putting you into what's called a tiger chair, which is a chair which holds you in a terribly restrained way, so that the body becomes very strained, muscle strain, and a computer, as you are being questioned, will detect this strain and then will effectively declare, well, you must be feeling so much strain that you must be guilty. They'll detect the muscle strain, they'll detect things like the heartbeat. So you're now reaching a point where people in China can be surveyed, arrested, interrogated, and then incarcerated by technology, not by a human being. This is terribly unjust, and we now have approaching 2 million, it's estimated, Uyghurs in these detention camps simply because of the fact that they are Uyghurs.
And it's horrifying, isn't it? We kind of think those things were there in the 20th century, but very much happening today.
These are things that would I think make the hairs of George Orwell stand up at the back of his neck. These are Orwellian plus. Yeah. And unfortunately, this technology is not just being used in China. This technology is being sold to many other countries. And not, I suspect, always for good purpose.
And we're hearing obviously a lot of the news at the moment about Ukraine and Russia, but even in Ukraine at the moment, with Christians completely under fear of what's happening in Russian areas.
Yes, in Ukraine, the fight for religious freedom is part of their fight. And you can see this very clearly if you look at the parts of Ukraine which were already occupied by what we call pro-Russian separatists from about 2014. In those areas now, there have been laws brought in which require churches to register. If a church doesn't register, then they cannot meet to worship. And so if the government refuses registration, effectively that church cannot exist. And the Protestant churches, Presbyterian, Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, by and large, virtually none have been able to register. And so we have them living in a climate of fear, of them being subject to raids, under surveillance. We've even now seeing that certain books, including one version of the Gospel of St. John from the Bible, being banned, and currently now under the fighting that's going on, there are pastors who are disappearing. So this is a really relevant aspect of the battle in Ukraine now. These people are fighting for. And I'm full of admiration, as I know we all are. It's very interesting, but the right to freedom of religion or belief is within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's in Article 18. In that declaration, which was developed after the Second World War and after the Holocaust, Article 18 says that everyone should have the right to hold a faith, to share with others their faith, to join with others to worship, and to change a faith. And President Roosevelt, who developed this, the UN and the Article Declaration of Human Rights, he said there are 4 basic rights or 4 basic elements that make up a safe democratic society. You need to be free from fear. You need to be free from want. You need to have freedom of expression and freedom of belief. And if those are not there, then a society cannot be free. And when we look at Ukraine today, we can see they're fighting for all of that.
It is just remarkable what's going on before our eyes there, isn't it? And
it is remarkable.
And we see on the screen actually Article 18, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is a good one just to hold on to and just to remember.
Absolutely.
So you have this conference coming up in July, 5th to 6th of July. Do you tell us something about the international conference? Why is it being put on? And was it your idea, or was it where did it come from?
No, I can't claim it was my idea. This is a conference where the UK is hosting representatives from 50 countries. We've invited government ministers, we've invited faith leaders and representatives, civil society activists. By civil society activists, I mean organisations like Open Doors, to come, and there'll be hundreds of people coming to London, to central London, to talk about how we can address this. What can we do to ensure that actually this situation changes? How can we ensure that governments actually have in place better laws and train their police, train their judicial system so that they can apply those laws, so that someone like the young girl I mentioned earlier can't get justice? How can we inspire the younger generation who've caught hold of the issue of climate change, yet really aren't aware of this? How can we inspire young people to use social media to broadcast this global issue and to get people to change, so that even individuals will start to realise in countries where there is oppression that it is wrong? How can we include in education systems freedom of religion or belief? How can we have an improvement in other countries within their foreign offices, as we've been trying to do in our foreign office, to encourage our ambassadors across the world, in almost 200 countries, our representatives across the world in almost 200 countries, to actually try and work with the communities there to improve understanding between peoples of faith. I was in what was Burma, Myanmar, a few years ago. I went out there with the speaker, and one of the things that we did was just gather together in the embassy there, the British embassy, about 6 leaders of different faiths, just to talk together. And they said that they'd never actually been gathered together in that way. And so if people don't talk, if they don't dialogue, if they don't meet others of a different faith, then there isn't that likelihood of a relationship. And one of the problems that happens, of course, if there's suspicion, if there's prejudice, it's so easy for differences to escalate, sometimes unfortunately even to violence. And this is where often we'll see in communities mob violence occurring. If we can promote better understanding, because at the end of the day, we are talking about human beings. This is what motivates me to work in this field. When I remember the fact that, every one of us is a human being created by the Lord and special in His sight. And whilst we talk about these vast numbers of people who are persecuted, imprisoned, tortured, each one of them is special. Can we do something to help change this mindset of prejudice often, and of sometimes of serious bigotry against people simply because of what they believe? Now, we might not all, and we don't, of course, all agree with our beliefs, with others' beliefs. But the right to hold them, and as Article 18 says, the right to change them, is so important. If we don't respect that, if we don't respect as Christians the right for others to hold different beliefs, how can we then claim the right to fulfill that great commission that the Bible talks about, to share our own faith and to ask them to listen to us as we are prepared to listen to them?
And of course, one of the great problems is if someone becomes a Christian from a different background, that's incredibly hard for them.
Incredibly hard in many countries. This is awful. In many countries, the issue of apostasy, where someone changes their faith and becomes a Christian, can result in them being thrown out of their home. And they can end up without a job. if they're a young person, not able to finish their education, rejected by their family. It is a real issue, and something which does need to be much more addressed and recognised, and it's one of the issues that we want to look at this conference.
So who will be there at the conference? What kind of countries are represented? Because you've got 50, you said?
Yes. Yeah. Well, we're hoping that we'll have some countries where issues aren't so comfortable, where these issues aren't so, and we're wanting to invite them in a way that is not threatening, because none of us have got all the answers. None of us are doing everything right in all of this. But we hope we'll have some countries where there are problems. But at the same time, much of the leadership on this issue is from an alliance of countries called the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance. And this is the group of 36 countries that I mentioned. And that's an alliance which I've got the privilege of chairing this year. It's countries from America, Brazil, across to here the Netherlands, and then over to Cyprus, Sierra Leone in Africa, down to Australia. Representatives from all these countries and many others, we hope to come together. The point being that if we can all together say our governments want to speak with a collective voice, that we want to see change on this issue, then our collective voice is a lot stronger than one individual country speaking. So that's the purpose of the conference this year, of coming together and coming together to look at how we really can promote solutions and share good practice. Let me give you another example. The UK is the only country which has an all-party group like ours, where members of Parliament for many years, and I'm privileged to include myself in this, we've worked together. I've been in this all-party group, cross-party, every political party is involved, asking our government to do things to address this issue. We're the only country in the world with an all-party group like this. If we can encourage some of the other countries who come to actually develop all-party groups, then the MPs speaking out in the parliaments will often encourage their own government to put resources into this issue. It's only MPs speaking out in our parliament that develop the Truro Review, and in turn has got our Foreign Office to put much more resources into this. If we can inspire other countries to have all-party groups, that would be one really exciting outcome from this. Because one of the things I know is that when we speak in our parliaments, people in other countries do hear. I was amazed the first time I spoke about North Korea in the UK Parliament, about 3 weeks later, to get a letter from someone in South Korea saying, thank you so much for speaking out in the UK Parliament and supporting people like my family who are still back in North Korea. I thought, that's amazing. What a privilege.
That is remarkable.
Yeah.
So do you think this conference is going to get the global attention it needs for more people to understand what's going on?
It's one of the things we have to pray about. This is the biggest, the government's this is a multi-million-pound investment the government's making in this project, in this conference, and it's the biggest conference being hosted by the UK government this year in the UK. Okay. And so, yes, we really do need to pray that investment will reap appropriate returns.
So that's happening July 5th and 6th?
5th and 6th of July in central London, but outside that, there are lots and lots of other events going on which are being organised, for example, by Open Doors, by Aid to the Church in Need, these visits that David Burrows and I are doing across the country, the End the Persecution campaign, as you say, we're about 20 odd, but we're holding lots and lots of events, even around those 2 days, organised not necessarily by the government, but by organisations who are saying, we want to play our part and make this change happen. And they're bringing over, a lot of these organisations are bringing over survivors of persecution from other countries. Someone like Helen Bahane, who is a gospel singer, and she was imprisoned in Eritrea, a country which does not tolerate religious freedom at all, and she was imprisoned as a fairly young woman. Their prisons are not like ours. I know someone from Eritrea who now works as a pastor here in London, and he does a lot of prison work, and he goes into the prisons, and he'll say to the prisoners here, you know, you're living in a hotel. You've got a bed, you've got electricity, you have television, you have food, heating. Some prisons in Eritrea are literally a hole in the ground. And if the guards get tired or lazy, they can block the air vents up, and that's the end. And Helen was imprisoned in a shipping container. And these shipping containers are used as prisons. And in them, you are almost burnt to death in the noonday sun with the heat of the metal, and then almost frozen to death at night. And many people in those containers, most, I would imagine, go mad. And the guards said to her, why aren't you going mad? And she said, because I've got the Word of God, I've got the Bible in my head. So they started beating her head to beat it out of her. Wonderfully, Helen survived, and she is now one of the survivors who will come over to the UK for our conference to highlight, as I've said earlier, the fact that we can only begin to compute in our minds the suffering of persecution if we can actually identify it through an individual's. And that's what Helen and others will do, coming over from many different countries to tell their stories.
And certainly hearing the story of the individual just brings it home, is it? It's not just a number.
Absolutely.
It's an individual.
That's right. Another person who will be speaking, I hope, is a young man called Timothy Cho, who now works for Open Doors, and he escaped from North Korea. Escaped twice, actually. The first time he sadly was caught and returned and very badly beaten. But because he was so young, he was still a teenager, fortunately he wasn't imprisoned, and he managed to escape again, and escaped over to now living in the UK, and it's a wonderful story. He found Christ, and now campaigns and works with Open Doors to highlight this issue. And so, you know, stories of survivors, in one sense tragic, but also wonderful when you can see how lives can be transformed through this situation changing.
So how can we be playing a part? There's a number of churches represented here. So as a local church or as an individual, how can we best support the persecuted church around the world?
Well, I think there are a number of ways. Obviously, the most important is to pray. And to pray for the conference, that this government initiative will actually reap change, that other governments will change as a result, and look at how they can do more, and that those governments which are overlooking or even condoning or being involved in persecution, that they will be challenged to change. That we will see the next generation, a young generation, inspired as they were with climate change, to actually really get hold of this and say, this isn't right and it's got to stop. Please pray, therefore, that the conference will really have impact. Pray the right people will come. What we do need, we need some senior government ministers to come. The Prime Minister is supporting this conference. Our Foreign Secretary will be speaking at it. We need senior ministers, because they're the ones that can make commitments and can promote change in their own governments. So for the right people to come. Pray for organisations like the ones we've mentioned, Christian Solidarity Worldwide, Aid to the Church in Need, Open Doors, that they can really be increasingly impactful in their work. They're the ones often that are sending people out, often in danger, to bring back the accounts of these people who are suffering and to tell the stories. So pray for their work, that and they rely on donations. They don't have government funding, so pray that they will be supported and strengthened through this. And then, if you could pray for the work of the alliance that I've mentioned. This alliance of 36 countries as it is now. It was 33 at the start of the year, and during the year I'm privileged to be chair, I'm trying to grow it. Ultimately, I'd like to see 50 countries, because that would be a huge number. So please pray that this alliance will grow of countries who have representatives like me. We meet virtually on a monthly basis to share our knowledge and our approach towards this work. But additional countries will make a difference. I'm currently in correspondence with about 20 countries, including many in the Commonwealth who are not members of the alliance. And if you could pray that my correspondence, my asking them to join, that they would do so. There's much more we could pray for, but it's really for change, isn't it? And in the meantime, for people who are currently suffering. It is remarkable that people will accept the suffering that they do for their faith, and so we have to constantly remember them and ask the Lord to give them that grace that is actually beyond my understanding.
And how can we be praying for you personally, Fiona?
Well, I've a lot on in the run-up to particularly July. So just for prioritisation of work, that I can get through everything, and that my staff too, it's not just me, that my staff can really work well as a team, and that the old enemy who prowls around seeking to cause us problems and difficulties, that he will keep away, because this is a spiritual battle. It's not just a practical one. So just prayer for strength, and to keep close to the Lord, so that I can ensure that each day I spend my time as He'd want me to. Yeah.
Brilliant, Fiona. That's a great way to end before we turn to prayer. Thank you so much.
We're
going to pray for Fiona and the conference and what's happening around the world now. But let's give Fiona a big round of applause. I'm just going to read one passage from the Bible, which is up on the screen, which I trust will encourage us in praying for what's happening around the world. From 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 to 6, the Apostle Paul writes, I urge them, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives, in all godliness and holiness. This is good, and pleases God our Saviour, who wants all people to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. For there's one God, and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all people. This has now been witnessed to at the proper time. And that's a passage that encourages to pray. Pray for Fiona, pray for leaders, pray for the conference, pray for countries around the world.